Everyone, my dear viewers. In this video, I break down the myths Brits believe about Americans and what actually happens when those myths hit real system in the US.
Do you guys really clap when the plane lands? I asked. The American next to me smiled. Only when we survive, he said. The cabin stayed silent. No applause. Just seatbelts clicking open. I sat there, confused, because everything I thought I knew about Americans suddenly felt like a script that no one else was following anymore. In New York, I expected everyone to be loud. Like, aggressively loud. Reality hit in a deli. Next, the cashier said flatly. The guy in front of me ordered quietly. No jokes. No charm. Just efficiency. I stepped up, overcompensated. Hey, how's your day going? He blinked once. Order. Silence. People behind me didn't react. That was the moment I realized. Volume isn't personality. It's context. I walked out with my sandwich, replaying it. In Britain, you soften everything. Add politeness like patting. Here, it wasn't rude. It was clean. No wasted words. No performance. Just function. I used to think Americans filled space with noise. But standing there, I understood something uncomfortable. Sometimes they just remove everything unnecessary, including the part where they pretend to care. In Chicago, I believed Americans all lived in huge houses. Then I visited my friend's apartment. This is it? I asked, stepping inside. Yeah, he said. Studio. Bed next to kitchen. No hallway. No space. I laughed, thinking it was temporary. How long are you here? He shrugged. 3 years. Silence hit. Not awkward. Just factual. Turns out, size isn't universal. It's situational. Later, I asked him why. Location, he said. Price. No complaint. No apology. Just trade-offs. I had grown up thinking America meant excess by default. Bigger everything. But here was a man choosing less on purpose. Not because he failed, but because the system required prioritization. That's when the myth cracked. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like realizing a map you trusted was missing entire cities. In a restaurant in Boston, I assumed tipping controlled everything. Service equals reward. I smiled at the waiter. We'll take great care of you, I said, hinting. He nodded once. Neutral. Service stayed exactly the same. No upgrades. No extra attention. Just steady, consistent delivery. When the bill came, I tipped high anyway. He glanced at it. Thank you. Nothing changed. That bothered me more than it should have. In my head, money shifted outcomes. Here, it didn't. It acknowledged effort, but didn't influence behavior. I asked my American friend later. So tipping doesn't upgrade things. He shook his head. It's appreciation, not leverage. That sentence stayed with me, because it quietly removed a kind of control I didn't realize I expected to have.
At this point, I think nothing could surprise me anymore. Friends, I was wrong.
There's a pattern I started noticing. British myths about America aren't random. They're exaggerated signals. We take one visible trait and stretch it across an entire culture. Loud becomes always loud. Big becomes always big. Friendly becomes always personal. But systems don't work like that. They're precise, contextual, and once you step inside them, the exaggeration disappears instantly. In Los Angeles, I thought Americans drove everywhere because they loved it. Freedom, right? My friend tossed me his keys. You drive, he said. I laughed. Sure. 40 minutes later, still in traffic, I wasn't laughing. This is normal? I asked. He nodded. Every day. Silence. No music. No excitement. Just movement without progress. Turns out, it wasn't love. It was necessity. That shift hit harder than expected. Back home, driving is optional. Here, it felt structural. Designed. Required. I had romanticized it. Open roads, endless choice. But sitting there, barely moving, I realized something blunt. Freedom isn't always about what you can do. Sometimes it's about what you have no choice but to do. And that's a very different kind of system. In a quiet suburb, I walked past houses at night. No fences. No gates. Just open lawns. I whispered, is this safe? My friend laughed softly. Yeah. I pointed. Anyone could just walk in. He shrugged. Why would they? That answer lingered longer than it should have. Because where I'm from, systems assume risk. Here, this one assumed trust. In a hospital waiting room in Seattle, I assumed chaos meant urgency. People coughing, shifting, checking phones. This must be serious, I whispered. The nurse called names slowly. No rush. No panic. I stepped forward. Excuse me, how long? She looked at me. You'll be called. Nothing else. I stepped back. No one reacted. That silence wasn't neglect. It was order. I sat there longer than expected, watching people accept the pace without question. No one argued. No one negotiated urgency. I leaned toward a man beside me. Don't you want to be seen faster? He shook his head. Everyone does. That answer landed strangely. Because it didn't challenge the system, it accepted it. Fairness here wasn't speed. It was sequence. At a supermarket in Texas, I expected cashiers to be cold. Fast, efficient, distant. Instead, she smiled. How's your day going? I froze. Good, yours? She nodded, scanning items. Pretty good. I waited for more. It didn't come. Conversation ended exactly there. Perfectly timed. Not rude. Not deep. Just calibrated. I walked away realizing friendliness doesn't always mean connection. That moment stayed with me longer than expected. Back home, small talk stretches awkwardly. Here, it had boundaries. A beginning. A clean end. No drift. I thought Americans were overly open, always engaging. But this wasn't openness. It was structure disguised as warmth. A controlled interaction that gave just enough humanity, without letting it spill into unpredictability. That precision felt almost engineered. At this point, I started seeing a pattern I couldn't ignore. British stereotypes assume personality drives behavior. But in America, systems quietly do. Interactions aren't random, they're shaped. Tipping, driving, talking, waiting, it all follows invisible rules. And if you miss those rules, it feels like people are inconsistent. They're not. You're just outside the logic that holds everything together. In a co-working space in San Francisco, I assumed people loved networking. So what do? I asked a guy beside me. He looked up briefly. Design. Silence. I waited. Nothing. What kind? I pushed. He paused. Product. Back to his screen. Conversation over. I sat there, awkward, realizing something uncomfortable. Initiative doesn't guarantee engagement here. Later, I asked someone else about it. People are focused, she said. Work time is work time. No apology. No softness. I had assumed openness meant availability. That asking meant access. But here, boundaries weren't announced. They were enforced through absence. No reaction. No continuation. Just quiet disengagement. And somehow, that was more final than any verbal rejection I'd experienced. In a bookstore in Portland, I expected recommendations to be enthusiastic. What's good? I asked. The clerk pointed. That shelf. I laughed. No, I mean your favorite. He looked at me, calm. That shelf. Silence. No passion. No persuasion. Just direction. I picked a book randomly, feeling oddly unsupported. Turns out, choice here isn't guided. It's handed back to you. Walking out, I realized something subtle but sharp. Back home, staff often guide decisions, influence outcomes. Here, they provide access, then step back. No pressure. No shaping. Just availability. It felt strange at first, almost like indifference. But the longer I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't lack of care. It was respect for autonomy, taken to its logical extreme.
This last one, friends, I still don't fully understand.
In a gym in Miami, I believed Americans loved self-improvement loudly. Motivation, energy, hype. A guy beside me lifted silently. No music. No shouting. Just repetition. I said, you training for something? He shook his head. Consistency. That was it. No story. No goal speech. Just one word. And somehow, that felt more intense than any motivational speech I'd ever heard. I watched him for a while, expecting a shift. A moment of expression. Nothing came. Just steady movement. No performance. I realized then, I had confused visibility with effort. Thought loudness meant commitment. But here, at least in that moment, discipline looked almost invisible. Quiet. Repetitive. Unimpressive on the surface. And that made it harder to notice, but impossible to fake. By now, the myths weren't just breaking. They were rearranging themselves into something clearer. Americans aren't one thing. They're a system of contexts. Loud in one place. Silent in another. Friendly, but bounded. Efficient, but not cold. And once you see that, the stereotypes don't just disappear. They shrink. into fragments of truth that only make sense when you know where they belong. In a hotel in Denver, I assumed upgrades were always negotiable. I leaned in. Anything better available? The receptionist checked the screen. We're fully booked. I smiled. Even for a little extra? She paused. Still fully booked. Silence stretched. No irritation. No manager. Just a boundary delivered without emotion. I stood there longer than necessary, waiting for flexibility to appear. It didn't. That moment stayed with me. Not because of the answer, but because of how final it felt. In Britain, no often hides a maybe. Here, it didn't. It meant exactly what it said. No layers. No second attempt. I walked away realizing something sharp. Certainty removes negotiation. And when a system is built on certainty, charm becomes irrelevant almost instantly. At a house party in Austin, I expected openness to mean intimacy. People laughed, talked, shared stories. I joined in. So what do you guys really think about politics? Silence. Immediate. Subtle, but total. Someone sipped their drink. Another checked their phone. Conversation shifted sideways. No confrontation. Just quiet avoidance. That silence felt louder than any argument I'd ever heard. Later, I asked a friend about it. Wrong setting, he said. Timing matters. That surprised me. I thought openness meant anything goes. But here, it was selective. Controlled. You could be friendly without being personal. Engaged without being exposed. That distinction wasn't obvious until you crossed it. And once you did, the correction wasn't verbal. It was social disappearance. In a coffee shop in Chicago, I assumed customization was expected. Can I get this without milk, less ice, extra foam, and slightly warmer? I asked. The barista nodded. No reaction. No judgment. Just typed it in. Drink arrived exactly as requested. Perfect. I smiled. You don't think that's too much? She shrugged. You ordered it. That was it. Walking away, I realized something quietly powerful. Back home, too many changes feel like inconvenience. Here, they felt like specification. Not personal, not emotional, just input and output. I had expected resistance, or at least a reaction. But there was none, because the system didn't interpret my request. It processed it. And somehow, that made the interaction feel both easier and colder. At this point, the biggest shift wasn't about Americans. It was about perception. British culture often reads between lines. Searches for tone, implication, hidden meaning. But in many American contexts, the line is the meaning. What's said is what exists. Nothing more. Nothing underneath. And if you're not used to that, it feels like something is missing. It isn't. It's just not layered. In a meeting in Atlanta, I expected disagreement to be softened. A colleague spoke. Another interrupted. I don't agree. Just like that. No cushion. No apology. The room didn't react. Discussion continued. I sat there, slightly tense, waiting for repair. It never came. Because there was nothing to repair. The disagreement wasn't conflict. It was function. Afterward, I asked someone about it. Wasn't that a bit harsh? He looked confused. Why? That question caught me off guard. Because I didn't have a clear answer. It just felt harsh. But feeling wasn't the metric here. Clarity was. And in that system, removing softness didn't damage communication. It made it more efficient. Even if it felt uncomfortable. At an airport in Phoenix, I assumed rules could be nudged. My bag was slightly overweight. It's just a kilo, I said, smiling. The agent shook her head. It exceeds the limit. I leaned in. Can't you let it slide? She didn't move. You can remove items or pay. Silence. No flexibility. Just options. Fixed. I opened my bag, quietly removing things. Standing there, repacking in front of strangers, I felt something shift internally. Not frustration, adjustment. Because the system didn't resist me. It ignored my attempt to change it. That was different. And strangely, once I accepted it, everything became simpler. No negotiation. No uncertainty. Just clear outcomes based on clear rules. It wasn't personal. It was structural. Looking back, the myths didn't disappear, they transformed. Americans aren't louder, bigger, or more open. They're more context-driven than we assume. And once you see that, the confusion fades. What felt inconsistent becomes predictable. What felt exaggerated becomes precise. The real difference isn't personality. It's systems. And once you understand the system, the behavior finally makes sense.
Friends, did you like these stories? If so, like and write in the comments what topics you would like to hear the next stories on. Thank you. Bye bye.